The October wind howled across the Montana plains like a wounded animal, rattling the windows of Jack Morrison's ranch house with an intensity that seemed to match the emptiness in his chest. 3 years had passed since Sarah's death, yet the silence in the house still felt as sharp as broken glass. He sat in his worn leather chair, the same one where Sarah used to curl up with her knitting, watching the flames dance in the fireplace that now served more as a companion than a source of warmth. Jack was a man of 45 years, weathered by sun and sorrow in equal measure. His hands, calloused from decades of ranch work, held a cup of coffee that had grown cold hours ago. The ranch sprawling around his modest home covered 3,000 acres of some of the most beautiful and unforgiving land in Big Sky country. Cattle dotted the rolling hills like dark shadows against the ambergrass, and the Rocky Mountains stood sentinel in the distance, their peaks already crowned with early snow. The loneliness had become his constant companion. It followed him as he rode fence lines, sat with him during solitary dinners, and whispered in his ear during the long hours before dawn when sleep refused to come. His nearest neighbor lived 12 miles away, and the small town of Cedar Falls was a 30-minute drive on good roads. Tonight, with the wind threatening to bring the season's first blizzard, even that connection to the outside world felt impossibly distant. He had built this ranch with Sarah, starting with nothing but a down payment scraped together from his Army savings and her teacher's salary. They had dreamed of filling the house with the laughter of children, of building something that would last for generations. The irony wasn't lost on him that he now possessed everything they had worked for, yet none of it mattered without her gentle presence to give it meaning. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 times, its deep voice echoing through rooms that felt too large for one person. Jack considered heading to bed, though he knew sleep would be elusive. The weather report had warned of a severe storm system moving in from the west, and he'd spent the afternoon securing equipment and moving his prized breeding horses to the barn closest to the house. Thunder rumbled overhead, followed by the first fat raindrops against the windows. Jack stood and walked to the kitchen, intending to rinse his coffee cup and check the locks one final time. The kitchen still bore Sarah's touch in its yellow curtains and herb garden on the windowsill, though the plants had long since withered under his neglectful care. As he reached for the light switch, a sound froze him in place. 3 sharp knocks on the front door, deliberate and urgent. Jack glanced at the kitchen clock, confirming what he already knew. It was past 11 at night, and nobody came calling at this hour, especially not in weather like this. His closest neighbor, Bill Henderson, would have called first, and the sheriff's department would have announced themselves. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Jack's military training kicked in automatically, his mind cataloging potential threats and responses. He'd kept his service pistol in the study since Sarah's death, more for peace of mind than any real expectation of trouble. Rural Montana was generally safe, but isolation had its own dangers. He moved quietly to the front window, peering through the gap in the curtains. The porch light illuminated a small figure hunched against the door, barely visible through the driving rain. Definitely human, and clearly in distress. Jack's caution warred with his ingrained sense of hospitality. Sarah had always scolded him for being too suspicious of strangers, reminding him that kindness was never wasted. "Who's there?" he called through the door, his voice carrying the authority he'd learned as a sergeant in the Army. The response came in accented English, high-pitched and desperate. "Please, sir, help me. My mama, she is having the baby. We need help, please." Jack's hand was already moving to unlock the door before his conscious mind caught up. A pregnant woman in labor, stranded in a storm, was not a threat to be analyzed, but a crisis demanding immediate action. He yanked the door open, and cold rain immediately swept into the entryway. On his doorstep stood a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, her long black hair plastered to her head by the rain, her slight frame shaking with cold and fear. She wore a thin denim jacket over what appeared to be pajamas, completely inadequate protection against the October storm. Her eyes, dark and wide with panic, met his with a desperation that cut through his heart like a blade. "Please," she repeated, water dripping from her chin as she spoke. "My mama, she cannot wait. The baby is coming now." "Good Lord, child, get inside before you freeze to death," Jack said, stepping back to allow her entry. She stumbled slightly as she crossed the threshold, and he caught her arm to steady her. Her skin was ice-cold through the wet fabric of her jacket. "Where's your mother?" he asked, scanning the darkness beyond the porch. "Is she in a car?" The girl shook her head, pointing toward the gravel road that led to his property. "We walked from the highway. Our car, it stopped working maybe 2 miles. Mama, she cannot walk anymore. She's behind the big rocks by your fence." Jack's mind raced through the implications. 2 miles on foot in this weather, with a woman in labor. The rocks she mentioned were probably the granite outcroppings about a quarter mile from the house, barely visible even in daylight. In this storm, with the temperature dropping toward freezing, exposure would be deadly within hours. "What's your name?" he asked, already moving toward the hall closet where he kept his heavy weather gear. "Li Wei," she answered, pronouncing it slowly for his benefit. "My mama is Chinmei Lin. We come from California, but our car broke down. She says the baby is not supposed to come for 3 weeks more, but—" Her voice broke, and Jack saw tears mixing with the rainwater on her young face. He pulled on his waterproof jacket and boots with practiced efficiency, the same routine he'd followed countless times for emergencies with livestock or equipment. "Li Wei, I need you to listen to me carefully," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm going to get your mother and bring her here. You're going to stay inside where it's warm and dry. Can you do that?" She nodded quickly, then grabbed his arm as he headed for the door. "Sir, I do not know your name, but thank you. In China, we say that kindness creates its own heaven. You're a very kind man." "Name's Jack Morrison," he replied, touched by her formal politeness despite the crisis. "And don't thank me yet. Let's get your mama safe first." He stepped back into the storm, immediately feeling the full force of the wind and driving rain. His truck was parked near the barn, about 50 yards from the house. The gravel crunched under his boots as he jogged toward it, already planning the rescue. The truck had 4-wheel drive and emergency medical supplies in the back, leftovers from his army days when being prepared for anything had been a matter of survival. As he started the engine and switched on the headlights, Jack found himself thinking about Sarah. She would have handled this situation with such natural grace, probably already preparing hot soup and gathering blankets while he went out into the storm. She'd had training as a school nurse before they married, and her calm competence in emergencies had always amazed him. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness as he navigated the dirt road toward his property fence. The girl had said near the big rocks, and he knew the spot she meant. It was a natural windbreak where cattle often sheltered during storms, formed by a cluster of granite boulders that had been deposited by glaciers millennia ago. He found them huddled behind the largest rock. The mother's slight form curled into the fetal position while she rode out a contraction. Even through the rain and darkness, Jack could see that Chunmei Lin was in advanced labor. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, and she moaned softly as the contraction peaked. Jack parked as close as possible and grabbed the emergency blankets from behind his seat. Chunmei Lin looked up as his flashlight beam found her face. She was perhaps in her early 30s, with delicate features and intelligent eyes that reflected both pain and relief at his appearance. Like her daughter, she was soaked to the skin and shivering uncontrollably. "Ma'am, I'm Jack Morrison," he said in the calm voice he'd used to reassure wounded soldiers years ago. "Your daughter Li Wei came to get help. We're going to get you somewhere warm and safe." Chunmei Lin nodded, trying to speak between contractions. Thank you. I am sorry to bring trouble to your home." "No trouble at all," Jack replied, wrapping the emergency blanket around her shoulders. "Can you walk to the truck if I help you?" Another contraction hit before she could answer, and Jack realized they might not have much time. The truck was only 20 feet away, but in her condition, even that distance could be challenging. He positioned himself on one side while she gripped his arm, supporting much of her weight as they made their slow way to the passenger side of the truck. Getting her into the cab required careful maneuvering, and by the time Jack climbed behind the wheel, Chunmei Lin was breathing heavily from the exertion. He cranked up the heater and pointed all the vents toward her, then began the careful drive back to the house. "How far apart are the contractions?" he asked, drawing on half-remembered conversations with Sarah about her nursing training. Maybe 5 minutes," Chunmei Lin managed between shallow breaths. "This baby, he wants to come tonight." Jack pressed a little harder on the accelerator. 5 minutes between contractions meant they were getting close to the active phase of labor. He wasn't qualified to deliver a baby, but the nearest hospital was 40 minutes away in good weather, and tonight's conditions would easily double that time. Li Wei was waiting at the front door as they pulled up to the house, her face pressed against the glass like a worried sentinel. She rushed outside as soon as she saw the headlights, not bothering with a coat despite the cold rain. "Mama," she called in Chinese, then switched to English. "Mr. Morrison, is she okay?" "She's going to be fine," Jack said with more confidence than he felt. "Let's get her inside where it's warm." Supporting Chan Mei Lin between them, they made their way into the house. Jack guided them directly to the living room, where the fireplace provided the warmest environment. He helped Chan Mei Lin settle onto the couch, propping her up with pillows while Li Wei knelt beside her, speaking rapid Chinese in soothing tones. "I need to call for an ambulance," Jack said, but even as he reached for the phone, he could see the doubt in Chan Mei Lin's eyes. "The roads," she said quietly. "In this storm, how long will it take?" Jack had been thinking the same thing. The main highway was treacherous in bad weather, and several low-water crossings between the ranch and town would be impassable if the rain continued. An ambulance might not be able to reach them, and even if it could, the journey to the hospital would be dangerous for everyone involved. The phone in his hand felt useless as another contraction gripped Chan Mei Lin. This one lasted longer and seemed more intense, causing her to grip Li Wei's hand so tightly that the girl winced in sympathy. "Mr. Morrison," Li Wei said softly, "maybe the baby cannot wait for the ambulance." Jack looked at the young woman writhing in pain on his couch, at her teenage daughter trying so hard to be brave, and made a decision that would change all their lives. He set down the phone and moved toward the hallway closet where Sarah had kept her nursing supplies. "Then, we'll manage this ourselves," he said. "Li Wei, I need you to help me gather some things." As he pulled clean towels from the linen closet, Jack found himself thinking about the strange ways life could pivot on a single moment. Hours ago, he had been a lonely widower facing another empty evening. Now he was preparing to help deliver a baby in his living room, surrounded by strangers who had appeared out of the storm like characters from a fairy tale. The grandfather clock chimed midnight as another contraction seized Chan Mei Lin, and Jack realized that whatever happened next, this night would mark a turning point. The question was whether it would end in tragedy or miracle. He looked at Li Wei, who was watching him with complete trust despite knowing him for less than an hour, and felt a familiar sensation he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. For the first time in 3 years, Jack Morrison felt needed. The next hour passed in a blur of organized chaos as Jack transformed his quiet living room into an impromptu delivery room. Years of military training had taught him that preparation could mean the difference between life and death, and tonight he drew on every lesson about staying calm under pressure that the Army had drilled into him. Li Wei proved to be remarkably capable for someone so young. She followed his instructions without question, helping him move furniture and gather supplies while maintaining a steady stream of gentle conversation with her mother in Mandarin. Jack found himself impressed by her composure, recognizing the same kind of strength under pressure that he'd seen in young soldiers facing their first combat. "Tell me about your mother's medical history," Jack said as he spread clean sheets over the couch. "Any complications with previous births? Allergies to medications?" Li Wei translated the question, then listened carefully to her mother's response. "She says this is her second baby. I was born in hospital in Beijing, no problems. She has no allergies that she knows about. But, Mr. Morrison, this baby comes early. She's worried something might be wrong." Jack nodded, understanding the concern. Premature births carried additional risks, though he tried to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. Early doesn't necessarily mean trouble. Sometimes babies just decide they're ready. Chan Mei Lin managed a weak smile at his words, and Jack realized she understood more English than she had initially let on. Pain and stress could make anyone revert to their native language, he knew. He'd seen it often enough with injured soldiers from different countries during joint operations. The wind outside seemed to be growing stronger, rattling the windows with increasing violence. Jack glanced at the weather radio he'd placed on the mantelpiece, noting that the storm was tracking as predicted. They would be isolated for hours, possibly until morning if the rain continued to fall at this intensity. "Li Wei, I need to ask you something important," Jack said as he checked the supplies one more time. Clean towels, scissors sterilized in boiling water, string for clamping the umbilical cord, and Sarah's old nursing textbook that he'd pulled from her study. "Do you know if your mother attended any childbirth classes? Does she know breathing techniques?" The teenager shook her head. "In China, the doctors do everything. Mama says American women go to classes to learn about having babies, but she never did this. Jack felt another wave of responsibility settle over his shoulders. Not only would he need to assist with the birth itself, but he'd also have to coach Chun Mei Lin through the process. He opened Sarah's nursing textbook to the section on emergency childbirth, grateful that his wife had been the type to annotate everything in the margins with her careful handwriting. "Okay," he said, settling into the chair beside the couch. "Chun Mei Lin, we're going to work through this together. When the next contraction comes, I want you to breathe slowly and deeply. Don't hold your breath or tense up. Li Wei, can you translate that?" The next contraction arrived right on schedule, and Jack guided both women through the breathing technique. He was amazed to see how quickly Chun Mei Lin adapted to his coaching, her natural intelligence allowing her to focus despite the pain and fear. Li Wei held her mother's hand and counted in Chinese, helping to establish a rhythm that seemed to ease the intensity of each wave. Between contractions, Jack learned more about these unexpected guests who had stumbled into his solitary life. Chun Mei Lin was a literature professor at a university in San Francisco. Li Wei was a sophomore in high school, gifted in mathematics and dreaming of becoming an engineer. They had been driving to Seattle to visit Chun Mei Lin's sister when their aging Honda had broken down on the interstate. "We called for a tow truck," Li Wei explained during a quiet moment. "But the man said maybe 4 hours because of the storm. Mama was feeling okay then, just tired from driving. But then the pain started, and they got worse very fast." Jack found himself admiring their courage. Lost on a dark highway in a foreign country, with a medical emergency developing, they had made the difficult decision to walk through a storm to seek help. It spoke to a kind of determination that he recognized and respected. As midnight turned to 1 in the morning, the contractions grew stronger and closer together. Jack could see that Chun Mei Lin was entering the transition phase of labor, the most intense period before active pushing began. Her quiet stoicism impressed him. She endured each contraction with minimal complaint, saving her energy for the work ahead. "Mr. Morrison," Li Wei said quietly, "I want to tell you something. When I knocked on your door tonight, I was very frightened. Not just about Mama, but about you. I did not know if you would help us or turn us away." Jack looked at the earnest young face beside him. "Why would I turn you away?" "Because we are Chinese," she said simply. "Sometimes people are not kind to us because we look different or sound different. But you did not even hesitate to help. Mama says you have a good heart." The words hit Jack harder than he'd expected. He thought about his own assumptions and prejudices about how quick he'd been to see a potential threat when he first heard the knocking. Yet when faced with genuine need, his instincts had been to help rather than to judge. Maybe Sarah's influence on him had been deeper than he'd realized. "People are just people," he said finally. "When someone needs help, nothing else matters much." Another contraction seized Chun Mei Lin, stronger than any before. This time, she couldn't suppress a cry of pain, and Jack saw her body beginning to bear down involuntarily. Active labor was beginning, and there would be no turning back now. "Li Wei, I need you to help me prepare your mother," Jack said, moving into the calm, authoritative mode that had served him well in the army. "We're going to need to check her progress, and then we'll know how close the baby is." The next hour tested everyone's limits. Jack found himself drawing on half-remembered conversations with Sarah about her nursing experiences, trying to piece together the knowledge he needed to safely guide Chun Mei Lin through delivery. Li Wei proved invaluable as a translator and source of comfort for her mother, while also managing to assist Jack with supplies and equipment. The storm outside seemed to reach a crescendo just as Chun Mei Lin entered the final stage of labor. Thunder cracked overhead with such force that the lights flickered, and Jack found himself grateful for the large supply of candles that Sarah had always kept around the house. If they lost power now, it would complicate everything. "I could see the baby's head," Jack announced, his voice tight with concentration and excitement. "Chun Mei Lin, you're doing beautifully. Just a few more pushes." Li Wei translated rapidly, her own excitement evident despite the stress of the situation. Chun Mei Lin nodded, her face flushed with effort but her eyes bright with determination. Jack positioned himself to catch the baby, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was witnessing. The baby emerged in a rush, sliding into Jack's waiting hands with a suddenness that took his breath away. A boy, tiny but apparently healthy, his skin a healthy pink color and his lungs already working as he announced his arrival with a strong cry that somehow cut through the sound of the storm outside. "You have a son," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion as he placed the baby on Chun Mei Lin's chest. "And he looks perfect." Li Wei burst into tears of relief and joy, speaking rapidly in Chinese while her mother examined her new son with wonder and exhaustion. Jack worked quickly to clear the baby's airway and ensure he was breathing properly, then covered both mother and child with warm blankets. "He's beautiful, Mama," Li Wei whispered, switching to English as if she wanted Jack to understand her words. "He looks like he was waiting for the right place to be born." Jack felt an unexpected tightness in his throat as he watched the reunion. The living room that had felt so empty and lifeless just hours ago now pulsed with the energy of new life. The baby's cries mixed with the women's gentle Chinese lullabies, creating a symphony that seemed to drive back the darkness both outside and within Jack's own heart. As he cleaned up and attended to the necessary post-delivery procedures, Jack found his mind wandering to Sarah and the children they had never been able to have. She would have loved this moment, would have known exactly what to do and say. Yet somehow, he felt her presence in the room, as if she were guiding his hands and steadying his nerves through the most important hour of his life. The grandfather clock chimed 2 in the morning as Jack finally allowed himself to relax. Mother and baby were stable. Li Wei was exhausted but glowing with pride, and the storm outside seemed to be beginning its gradual retreat. The worst was over, but Jack suspected that the real story was just beginning. He looked at the small family arranged on his couch, at the baby who had chosen to enter the world in a stranger's living room during a Montana blizzard, and felt something shift inside his chest. For the first time since Sarah's death, the silence in his house didn't feel oppressive. It felt full of possibility. "What will you name him?" Jack asked softly, not wanting to disturb the peaceful scene. Chun Mei Lin looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "In China, we believe that the place where a child is born brings them luck and protection. This little boy was born in the home of a kind stranger during a storm, safe and warm. Perhaps his name should honor that." Li Bei nodded enthusiastically. "Mama says maybe we call him Mingshan. It means bright mountain in Chinese, because he was born here in Big Sky Country, under the protection of the mountains." Jack felt honored by the symbolism, though he wasn't sure he deserved such recognition. "Mingshan Morrison," he said experimentally, then caught himself. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to presume about his last name." Chun Mei Lin exchanged a long look with Li Wei, and Jack saw something pass between them that he couldn't quite interpret. The baby chose that moment to open his eyes for the first time, gazing around the room with the unfocused wonder of the newly born. "Mr. Morrison," Li Wei said carefully, "may I ask you something? Do you have family nearby? Children or grandchildren?" Jack shook his head. "My wife passed away 3 years ago. We never had children of our own." The sadness in his voice must have been evident, because both women looked at him with such compassion that he felt exposed, as if they could see directly into the loneliness that had been eating away at him for so long. Then, perhaps, Chun Mei Lin said in careful English, "Perhaps Mingshan is lucky to be born in the house of someone who knows how to be alone but has not forgotten how to be kind." As dawn began to break over the Montana plains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jack Morrison realized that his life had changed irrevocably in the space of a single night. The storm was passing, but its aftermath would ripple through all their lives in ways that none of them could yet imagine. The morning sun revealed a transformed world outside Jack's windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind crystalline air and a landscape washed clean by the night's fury. The roads would be muddy for hours yet, but the immediate danger had lifted like fog before the dawn. Inside the house, a different kind of transformation was taking place. Jack had dozed fitfully in his armchair, waking every hour to check on Chun Mei Lin and the baby. Li Wei had curled up on the floor beside the couch, refusing to leave her mother's side even when Jack offered her the spare bedroom. Now, as morning light streamed through the windows, he watched this small family with a sense of wonder that he hadn't felt since childhood. Baby Mingshan had settled into a peaceful rhythm of sleeping, eating, and observing the world with dark eyes that seemed unnaturally alert for a newborn. Chun Mei Lin appeared stronger than Jack had expected, sitting up and nursing the baby with a serene competence that spoke to ancient wisdom about motherhood that transcended culture and language. "Mr. Morrison," Li Wei said softly, not wanting to wake her mother, who had finally drifted off to sleep. I called our family in San Francisco and Seattle to tell them we were safe. They were very worried when we did not arrive last night. Jack nodded, relieved that there were people who cared about them. What did you tell them about where you are? Li Wei hesitated, glancing at her sleeping mother before continuing. I told them we found help with a kind man who has a ranch. But, Mr. Morrison, I need to tell you something. We have a problem that I did not mention last night. Something in her tone made Jack pay closer attention. What kind of problem? Our car, it is very old and broken down many times before. The mechanic in San Francisco said it might not make the trip to Seattle, but Mama wanted to see her sister very much. When it stopped working yesterday, the tow truck man said it would cost more to fix than the car is worth. Jack was beginning to understand. So you're stranded. We have some money, but not enough for a new car or to rent one for so long. And now with the baby coming early, Li Wei's voice trailed off, but Jack could see the worry in her young face. The practical implications were significant. A woman with a newborn couldn't travel by bus across multiple states, especially not in October weather that threatened to turn worse at any moment. Yet they clearly couldn't stay in his house indefinitely either, no matter how welcome they were. What about your sister in Seattle? Can she help? Li Wei nodded quickly. Any men would help if she could, but she just started a new job and cannot take time off to come get us. She was going to help Mama with the baby when he came, but now everything is different. As if sensing that he was the subject of discussion, Ming Shan stirred in his mother's arms and opened his eyes. Jack found himself drawn to the infant's alert gaze, remembering Sarah's belief that newborns could see into people's souls. The baby seemed calm and content, remarkably so for having been born under such stressful circumstances. There's something else, Li Wei continued, her voice growing even quieter. Mama is too proud to ask for help, but I think we need to stay somewhere for a few days. The baby should see a doctor, and Mama needs to rest before we try to travel. Jack had been thinking the same thing. While Mother and baby both appeared healthy, a medical evaluation would provide important peace of mind. The nearest pediatrician was in Cedar Falls, and Dr. Sarah Chun coincidentally shared a heritage that might help with any communication issues. The road should be clear enough for travel by this afternoon, Jack said. I can drive you into town to see the doctor, and we can figure out the rest from there. Relief flooded Li Wei's face. You would do this for us? Even though you do not know us. I know enough, Jack replied simply. I know you're good people who found themselves in a tough situation. I know your mother is brave, and you're one of the most mature teenagers I've ever met. And I know that little boy deserves the best start in life we can give him. Chun Mei Lin stirred and opened her eyes, immediately focusing on her son before scanning the room to orient herself. Jack saw the moment when memory returned, when she remembered the events of the night, and where she was. Good morning, she said in careful English, her voice still weak but determined. I hope we did not disturb your sleep too much. Jack couldn't help but smile at her concern for his comfort after everything she'd been through. I've had worse nights. How are you feeling? Tired, but grateful, she replied, then switched to rapid Chinese as Li Wei leaned close to translate something. Mama wants to know if we can help you with anything, Li Wei said. She feels bad about causing so much trouble in your house. The only trouble is that I don't have proper baby supplies, Jack admitted. But we could take care of that when we go to town. Over the next few hours, Jack found himself settling into a domestic routine that felt both foreign and natural after 3 years of solitude. He prepared breakfast while Li Wei helped her mother with the baby, and they shared a simple meal that somehow felt like the most meaningful dining experience he'd had in years. Li Wei proved to be an eager helper in the kitchen, asking questions about American food and sharing stories about her mother's cooking. Chun Mei Lin watched these interactions with obvious pleasure, and Jack sensed that she was evaluating him as much as appreciating his hospitality. Your home is very beautiful, Chun Mei Lin said as they prepared to leave for town. It has good energy, peaceful but not lonely. Jack was surprised by her perceptiveness, especially the distinction she drew between peaceful and lonely. His house had felt profoundly lonely for 3 years, yet with their presence, it somehow felt like a home again. The drive to Cedar Falls took them through some of Montana's most spectacular scenery. Li Wei sat in the passenger seat, marveling at the endless expanse of prairie and mountains, while Chun Mei Lin dozed in the back with the baby secure in a makeshift car seat that Jack had cobbled together from pillows and blankets. Mr. Morrison, Li Wei said during a quiet stretch of highway. May I ask you about your wife? Li Wei mentioned that she passed away. Jack found that the question didn't hurt as much as it might have even a week ago. Sarah was a nurse and a teacher. She would have handled last night much better than I did. She always said that taking care of people was the most important work anyone could do. She sounds like a wise woman. I think she would be proud of how you helped us. The simple statement struck Jack more deeply than elaborate praise might have. He realized that for the first time since Sarah's death, he had acted in a way that she would have approved of completely. The thought brought comfort rather than pain. Dr. Sarah Chen's clinic was located in a converted Victorian house on Cedar Falls Main Street. The physician was roughly Chun Mei Lin's age, and Jack was gratified to see how quickly the two women connected despite coming from different regions of China with distinct dialects. The examination went smoothly. Ming Shan was slightly small, but healthy, with good reflexes and strong vital signs. Dr. Chun was impressed with Jack's emergency delivery, noting that everything had been done correctly despite his lack of formal training. You have a natural gift for remaining calm under pressure, she told Jack privately while Chun Mei Lin dressed the baby. Have you considered that this might not be coincidence? What do you mean? In Chinese philosophy, we believe that people come into our lives when we need them most and when they need us most. Perhaps this family was meant to find you last night. Jack wasn't sure he believed in fate, but he had to admit that the timing seemed remarkable. If they had broken down a day earlier or later, or if the storm had followed a different track, their paths might never have crossed. While they were in town, Jack helped the family purchase essential baby supplies, and a few changes of clothes to replace would have been lost in their luggage. Li Wei insisted on keeping careful track of every expense, promising to repay him as soon as they reached Seattle. What about your car? Jack asked as they loaded their purchases into his truck. The mechanic says it is not worth fixing, Chun Mei Lin replied. We will need to make other arrangements. Jack had been thinking about this problem throughout the morning, and an idea had begun to form. It was probably crazy, definitely impulsive, but it felt right in a way that he couldn't explain. What if you stayed at the ranch for a few more days, he suggested, until you're both stronger and we can figure out the best way to get you to Seattle safely. Li Wei translated quickly for her mother, and Jack saw a brief, intense conversation pass between them in Chinese. Finally, Chun Mei Lin turned to him with tears in her eyes. You are very kind to offer this, she said, but we cannot continue to impose on your generosity. It's not an imposition, Jack said honestly. I have a big house that's been too quiet for too long, and frankly, I'd like to make sure that little boy gets the best possible start in life. The truth was more complex than he could easily express. In less than 24 hours, this small family had awakened something in him that he'd thought was permanently buried with Sarah. Not romance or desire, but something deeper, a sense of purpose, of connection to life beyond his own solitary existence. That evening, as they settled back into the rhythm that had developed so naturally the night before, Jack found himself thinking about the strange turns that life could take. Yesterday, he had been a lonely widower counting the hours until bedtime. Tonight, he was part of something larger, something that felt like the family he and Sarah had never been able to create. Li Wei was helping him prepare dinner, while Chun Mei Lin rested with the baby in the living room. The teenager moved around his kitchen with growing confidence, asking questions about ingredients and techniques while sharing stories about Chinese cooking traditions. Mr. Morrison, she said as they worked together to prepare a simple pasta dish, I want to tell you something. Last night, when I was walking through the storm looking for help, I was very scared. Not just about Mama, but about what would happen to us if no one would help. She paused, concentrating on chopping vegetables with the careful precision he'd taught her. I said a prayer to my grandmother, who died when I was little. I asked her to help me find someone with a good heart. When you opened your door, I knew she had answered. Jack felt a familiar tightness in his throat. Your grandmother sounds like she was a wise woman. She always said that kindness creates circles that go on forever. When you help someone, they help someone else, and the good feeling spreads like ripples in water. Li Wei looked up at him seriously. I think you started new ripples last night, Mr. Morrison. As they sat down to dinner together, passing the baby between them and sharing stories from their very different worlds, Jack realized that Li Wei was probably right. He had no idea where these new ripples would lead, but for the first time in 3 years, he was eager to find out. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the prairie grass under a canopy of stars, and inside the ranch house, 3 generations shared a meal and began to weave the threads of an unlikely family. 3 days passed like pages from a story Jack had never expected to live. Each morning brought new discoveries as the boundaries between guest and family began to blur in ways that surprised everyone involved. Chun Mei Lin proved to be remarkably resilient, recovering from childbirth with the determined grace of someone accustomed to handling life's challenges on her own. Li Wei threw herself into ranch life with the enthusiasm of a city teenager, discovering that the rural world held wonders she'd never imagined. Jack found himself rediscovering his own home through their eyes. The kitchen that had felt sterile and unwelcoming for 3 years came alive with the sounds of Li Wei learning to make pancakes and Chun Mei Lin teaching him basic phrases in Mandarin. The living room where he'd spent countless lonely evenings now hosted impromptu Chinese lessons and quiet conversations about literature, child-rearing, and the strange paths that had brought them together. Ming Shan had settled into the household as if he'd always belonged there. Jack, who had never held a baby before that stormy night, found himself volunteering for feeding duties and diaper changes with an eagerness that amused both women. The infant seemed to recognize his voice, turning toward him with bright eyes whenever Jack entered the room. "He knows you saved his life," Chun Mei Lin observed one afternoon as she watched Jack bottle feed the baby with practiced competence. Babies remember kindness, even when they cannot speak. Jack had been thinking about the future, though he was reluctant to bring up the practical questions that would eventually need to be addressed. Chun Mei Lin's sister Min called every day from Seattle, growing increasingly concerned about their prolonged absence. The original plan had been for Chun Mei Lin to stay with her for several months after the baby's birth, but those arrangements were based on a normal delivery in a hospital, not the current circumstances. Li Wei had missed a week of school, though she seemed more excited about her ranch education than worried about her academic responsibilities. She learned to collect eggs from the chickens, help with basic horse care, and had even convinced Jack to teach her to drive his pickup truck around the ranch roads. "In San Francisco, I never drive anything except the school bus," she explained as they practiced three-point turns near the barn. "But here, driving feels like flying. Everything is so open and free." Jack watched her navigate the truck with growing confidence and felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. These people had brought life and laughter back to his ranch, but he knew their presence was temporary. Eventually, they would need to continue their journey to Seattle, and he would return to the solitude that had defined his existence for 3 years. The thought troubled him more than it should have. On Thursday evening, as they shared dinner by the fireplace, Chun Mei Lin brought up the subject that had been hovering unspoken between them. "Jack," she said, using his first name for the first time since her arrival, "we need to talk about our plans. Min is very worried about us, and Li Wei needs to return to school soon." Jack nodded, though part of him wanted to avoid this conversation indefinitely. "Have you thought about how you want to handle the travel? I could drive you to Seattle if that would be easier than trying to arrange other transportation." Li Wei looked up sharply from her homework. "You would drive us all that way?" "It's about a day's drive," Jack said. "I don't mind, and it would be safer for your mother and the baby than trying to manage bus or plane travel." Chun Mei Lin studied his face carefully, and Jack had the feeling she was seeing more than he intended to reveal. "That is very generous, but it would be a long trip for you to make alone on the return journey." "I don't mind driving alone," Jack replied, though the prospect of returning to an empty house felt more daunting than he wanted to admit. "Mr. Morrison," Li Wei said quietly, "may I ask you something personal?" Jack nodded, curious about what was on her mind. "Are you lonely here by yourself? I mean, before we came, were you happy living alone?" The directness of the question caught Jack off guard. Sarah had always said that children and teenagers often asked the most important questions because they hadn't yet learned that some truths were supposed to remain unspoken. "I thought I was managing okay," he said honestly, "but having you here has reminded me what it feels like to be part of a family again." Li Wei exchanged a meaningful look with her mother, and Jack sensed another of their rapid Chinese conversations taking place without words. Chun Mei Lin shifted Ming Shan to her shoulder and regarded Jack with a serious expression he'd learned to associate with important decisions. "Jack, may I tell you something about our situation that we have not mentioned before?" "Of course. When I decided to visit my sister in Seattle, it was not just for a vacation. I am considering taking a teaching position at the university there." The literature department has offered me a position that would start in January, after my maternity leave ends. Jack tried to process the implications of this information. So you might be moving to Seattle permanently? Perhaps. The position would allow me to be closer to Min, which would be helpful with the baby. And Li Wei could finish high school there, which might give her better opportunities for college. Li Wei had been listening to this conversation with growing agitation. Now she spoke up with unusual forcefulness. But, Mama, what about our life in San Francisco? My friends, my school, everything we know? Sometimes life asks us to be brave enough to start over. Chun Mei Lin replied gently. Look at what has happened to us in just a few days. Would you have believed a week ago that you could learn to drive a truck or help deliver a baby? Jack found himself thinking about his own reluctance to start over, about the 3 years he'd spent holding onto a life that had ended with Sarah's death. Starting over is harder when you're doing it alone, he said quietly. Chun Mei Lin looked at him with sudden intensity. Yes, it is. Which brings me to something I wanted to discuss with you. She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts before continuing. Min's apartment is small, and with a new baby, it will be very crowded. I've been thinking that perhaps we need to find another solution, something that would be better for everyone. What kind of solution? Jack asked, though something in her tone made his pulse quicken with possibilities he didn't dare name. What if we offered to rent part of your ranch? Li Wei could help with the horses and other work. I could help with the household management and cooking, and in return, you would have company and assistance while we would have a safe place to raise Ming Shan. Li Wei nearly dropped her pencil in excitement. Mama, are you serious? We could stay here. It's just an idea, Chun Mei Lin said quickly. Jack may prefer his privacy, and we would certainly understand if he does not want permanent house guests. Jack felt as if the world had suddenly shifted on its axis. The possibility of keeping this small family, of not returning to the crushing loneliness that had defined his recent years, was almost too much to hope for. What about the teaching position in Seattle? He asked. Universities have satellite campuses and distance learning programs, Chun Mei Lin replied. And Montana has universities too. Perhaps there would be opportunities here, given time. Li Wei was practically bouncing in her seat. Mr. Morrison, please say yes. I could learn so much here, and Mama would be safe, and Ming Shan would grow up with all this space and fresh air. Jack looked around the living room that had been transformed by their presence. Baby clothes draped over chairs, children's books scattered on the coffee table, the gentle sound of a sleeping infant's breathing mixing with the crackle of the fire. It felt like the home he and Sarah had always dreamed of creating. There would need to be some practical arrangements, he said slowly, his mind racing through the possibilities. Legal agreements about residency, arrangements for Li Wei's schooling, health insurance considerations. So you're not saying no? Li Wei asked hopefully. I'm saying it's the best idea I've heard in years, Jack replied, and felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. Chun Mei Lin smiled, and Jack saw tears of relief in her eyes. You're sure? It will be a big change for you, having people around all the time. I've been alone for 3 years, Jack said. I think I'm ready for some company. That evening, they made phone calls to Min in Seattle to explain the change in plans. Jack's sister-in-law was initially concerned about the arrangement, but her worries eased as she spoke with Jack directly and heard the genuine care in his voice when he talked about her family. Li Wei called her school in San Francisco to discuss transferring to Cedar Falls High School, while Chun Mei Lin researched online teaching opportunities and childcare licensing requirements. The practical details would be complex, but the emotional foundation felt solid in a way that surprised everyone involved. As they prepared for bed that night, Jack found himself standing in the doorway of what had been Sarah's study. Chun Mei Lin had been using it as a makeshift nursery, and now it hummed with new life and purpose. Ming Shan slept peacefully in the travel crib they'd purchased in town, while Li Wei had fallen asleep at the desk while researching Montana universities online. She is very excited about staying here, Chun Mei Lin said softly, appearing beside him in the doorway. I hope we are not making a mistake. Change is always a risk, Jack replied. But some risks are worth taking. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the peaceful scene before them. Jack thought about the grandfather clock in the hallway, still marking time as it had for decades, but now counting moments filled with laughter and conversation instead of solitary hours. Jack, Chun Mei Lin said quietly, I want you to know that this arrangement is not charity. We will pay our way, contribute to the household, help with the ranch work. We want to be partners, not dependents. I know, Jack said. And I want you to know that you're not just solving your housing problem. You're giving me back something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? A reason to light every lamp in the house, he said, thinking of that first night when their desperate knocking had interrupted his solitude. A reason to make this place feel like home again. As if sensing the significance of the moment, Ming Shan stirred in his sleep and made a soft, contented sound. Li Wei mumbled something in Chinese without waking, and Chen Mei Lin adjusted the blanket around her daughter's shoulders with the automatic care of motherhood. Jack realized that in the space of a few days, his carefully ordered bachelor existence had been thoroughly and permanently disrupted. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt more alive than he had since Sarah's death. The empty rooms that had echoed with his loneliness now hummed with possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they worked out the details of their unconventional arrangement. There would be paperwork and practical considerations, neighborhood questions, and bureaucratic hurdles. But tonight, as the Montana wind whispered around the house that no longer felt too large for its inhabitants, Jack Morrison went to sleep feeling like he was part of something larger than himself. For the first time in 3 years, he was no longer alone. 6 months later, Jack Morrison stood on his front porch watching Li Wei practice driving his pickup truck around the circular drive, Ming Shan giggling in his car seat beside her as she navigated the route with growing confidence. The spring air carried the scent of new grass and wildflowers, and the mountains in the distance wore caps of snow that caught the afternoon sun like crowns of light. The transformation had not been without challenges. There had been difficult conversations with lawyers about guardianship arrangements and immigration status, tense negotiations with the school district about Li Wei's transfer credits, and countless small adjustments as 4 very different people learned to share space and create new traditions together. Chen Mei Lin had secured a part-time teaching position with the University of Montana's distance learning program, conducting literature seminars via video conference while maintaining her care for Ming Shan. The work allowed her to use her expertise while remaining flexible enough to handle the demands of single motherhood. She had also begun teaching Mandarin classes at Cedar Falls High School, where her elegant manner and deep knowledge had quickly made her one of the most popular instructors. Li Wei had adapted to small-town Montana life with remarkable resilience. She joined the debate team at Cedar Falls High School, where her analytical mind and unique perspective had helped lead them to the state championships. Her initial concerns about fitting in had proved unfounded. Her classmates were fascinated by her stories of life in San Francisco and eager to learn about Chinese culture. She'd even started a cultural exchange club that had attracted students from 3 neighboring counties. Ming Shan, now 6 months old, had grown into a robust, happy baby who treated the vast Montana landscape as his personal playground. He could crawl with impressive speed across the hardwood floors, pulled himself up on furniture with determined concentration, and showed every sign of inheriting his sister's intelligence and his mother's quiet strength. For Jack, the changes had been profound in ways both large and small. The ranch house that had felt like a mausoleum for 3 years now hummed with life from dawn to dusk. Mornings began with Li Wei's alarm clock and Chen Mei Lin's gentle voice singing Chinese lullabies to Ming Shan. Evenings concluded with homework sessions, baby bath time, and conversations that ranged from American history to Chinese poetry to the best methods for training horses. The practical arrangements had evolved organically. Chen Mei Lin managed the household finances and meal planning with methodical precision, while Li Wei had taken over care of the chickens and had proved surprisingly adept at basic veterinary care for the horses. Jack handled the heavy ranch work and vehicle maintenance, but found himself consulting his housemates on everything from crop rotation to equipment purchases. They had faced skepticism from some quarters of the conservative rural community, though most of their neighbors had come to accept and even admire the unconventional arrangement. Dr. Chun had become a close friend and frequent dinner guest, often bringing other members of the small but growing Asian American community in the region. Bill Henderson, Jack's nearest neighbor, had initially been cautious but now regularly enlisted Li Wei's help with his computer problems and had learned enough Mandarin to conduct basic conversations with Chen Mei Lin. The most significant change, however, was one that Jack struggled to articulate even to himself. The grief that had defined his existence since Sarah's death hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something gentler, more like a cherished memory than an open wound. He still missed his wife profoundly, but her absence no longer felt like a negation of his future. "Mr. Morrison," Li Wei called from the truck, using the formal address she'd maintained despite his repeated invitations to call him Jack. "Come see how well Ming Shan likes riding with me." Jack walked down to the truck, where the baby was indeed clapping his hands with delight at the motion of the vehicle. Li Wei had proved to be a careful and responsible driver, though she still needed supervision for highway driving. "Your mother's going to be back from town soon," Jack reminded her. "We should probably get him inside for his afternoon feeding." Chun Mei Lin had driven into Cedar Falls for a faculty meeting at the high school, one of the few times she'd left Ming Shan for more than an hour. The baby had handled the separation well, though Jack suspected that Chun Mei Lin had found it more difficult than her son had. As they walked back toward the house, Li Wei carrying her brother with the practice competence she'd developed over the past months, Jack found himself thinking about the conversation he'd had with Sarah's sister the week before. Margaret had called from Denver to check on him, as she did every few months, and had been amazed by the change in his voice. "You sound like yourself again," she'd said. "Like the Jack I remembered from before Sarah got sick. I was so worried about you living out there all alone." Jack hadn't known how to explain that he was no longer the same person who had answered the door on that stormy October night. The man who had spent 3 years marking time until death claimed him had been replaced by someone who woke each morning curious about what the day might bring. The sound of Chun Mei Lin's car in the driveway interrupted his reverie. Ming Shan immediately perked up at the familiar engine sound, and Li Wei quickened her pace toward the house. "Mama," Li Wei called in Chinese as Chun Mei Lin emerged from the car, and Jack felt the familiar warmth that came with witnessing their joyful reunions, no matter how brief the separation had been. Chun Mei Lin hurried up the porch steps, her face brightening as Ming Shan reached for her with excited babbling. She took her son from Li Wei and immediately began the soft conversation in Mandarin that Jack had learned was her way of reconnecting with him after any absence. "How did the meeting go?" Jack asked as they moved inside. "Very well. Actually," Chun Mei Lin replied, though something in her expression suggested there was more to the story. "They asked me to consider taking on additional responsibilities next year, possibly a full-time position developing their foreign language curriculum." Li Wei looked up from the homework she'd spread across the kitchen table. "That's wonderful, Mama, but would you have enough time for Ming Shan?" "That's something we would need to discuss as a family," Chun Mei Lin said carefully, and Jack noticed her use of the word family with the same warm surprise he felt every time one of them referred to their arrangement in those terms. As the evening progressed through their established routine, dinner conversation revealed more details about the job opportunity. The school district was receiving state funding to develop comprehensive language programs, and Chun Mei Lin's combination of academic credentials and practical teaching experience made her an ideal candidate to lead the initiative. It would mean more money and better benefits, she explained as they cleaned up after dinner. But it would also mean longer hours and more responsibility. "I need to know that Ming Shan would be well cared for." Jack found himself speaking before he'd fully thought through the implications. "You know I'd help with Ming Shan any time you need it." "We all would," Li Wei nodded enthusiastically. "I could pick him up from daycare on days when you have late meetings, Mama, and Mr. Morrison is getting very good at changing diapers." Chun Mei Lin smiled at this observation, though Jack detected a hint of uncertainty in her expression. "You are both very kind, but this would be a significant commitment. If I take this position, we would probably need to stay here for several years to see the program through to completion." "Is that a problem?" Jack asked, realizing as he spoke that the thought of them leaving still filled him with something approaching panic. "I want to make sure this arrangement is still working for everyone involved," Chun Mei Lin said diplomatically. "We have been here 6 months now, which is longer than any of us initially planned. I don't want to assume that you want us to stay indefinitely." Li Wei looked between the two adults with the sharp perception of someone who had learned to read subtleties in cross-cultural communication. "Are you asking Mr. Morrison if he wants us to leave?" "I'm asking if he feels comfortable making this a more permanent arrangement," Chun Mei Lin clarified. "If I take this job, it would mean we're committing to building our lives here long-term." Jack looked around the kitchen where they had shared hundreds of meals, where Li Wei had learned to make his grandmother's biscuit recipe and taught him to use chopsticks properly, where Ming Shan had taken his first solid food and spoken his first recognizable word. The idea of returning this space to the sterile efficiency of his bachelor years felt impossible. "I can't imagine this house without you," he said simply. "Any of you." Li Wei jumped up from her chair and hugged him impulsively, something that still surprised him with its warmth. So we can stay? Really stay? If you want to, Jack replied, hugging her back. This is your home now. Chen Mei Lin's eyes filled with tears, though whether from relief or emotion, Jack couldn't tell. You are sure? Even when Ming Shan gets bigger and louder? Even when Li Wei becomes a difficult teenager instead of the angel she is now? Hey, Li Wei protested, though she was grinning. I'm already a teenager, and I'm not difficult. Give it time, Jack said solemnly, then broke into a smile. Yes, I'm sure. This place has been waiting for a family. I just didn't realize it until you arrived. That night, after Li Wei had gone to bed, and Ming Shan had settled into his crib, Jack and Chen Mei Lin sat on the front porch sharing a cup of tea and watching the stars emerge over the prairie. It had become their habit on clear evenings, a time for quiet conversation and planning for the future. Jack, Chen Mei Lin said softly, I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done for us. Not just the night Ming Shan was born, but every day since then. You don't need to thank me, Jack replied. You've given me more than I've given you. I'm not sure that's true, but I'm glad you feel that way. She paused, seeming to consider her words carefully. When I was pregnant with Ming Shan, I used to worry about raising 2 children alone. I had my career and my sister's support, but I wondered if that would be enough. And now I think Ming Shan will grow up knowing what it means to be part of a family that chooses to care for each other. That's a gift I could never have given him on my own. Jack nodded, thinking about the unexpected forms that family could take. Li Wei told me once that kindness creates circles that go on forever. I think she was right. My daughter is very wise for someone so young. Chen Mei Lin agreed. She sees things that adults sometimes miss because we make them too complicated. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night, sounds of the prairie, and the distant lowing of cattle settling down for the evening. Jack thought about Sarah and wondered what she would think of the life he'd built in her absence. He suspected she would approve of the laughter that now filled their house, of the way he'd learned to find joy in small daily rituals and unexpected moments of connection. Chen Mei Lin, he said eventually, using her full name as she preferred. There's something I want to ask you. Yes. Would you be willing to let me adopt Li Wei legally? Not to replace her father's memory or change your relationship with her, but to make sure she has the same legal protections and opportunities as any other American teenager. Chen Mei Lin turned to look at him in surprise. You want to do that? I would be honored to do that, Jack corrected. If you're comfortable with the idea, and if Li Wei wants it. She adores you, Chen Mei Lin said softly. You've been more of a father figure to her in 6 months than she's ever had. But are you sure you want that legal responsibility? Jack thought about Li Wei's excited chatter as she planned her college applications, her careful attention to his stories about ranch management, the way she'd started calling him for advice even when Chen Mei Lin was available to help. I've been acting like her father anyway. Making it legal would just confirm what's already true. And Ming Shan, that's your decision to make, Jack said. But if you ever wanted to formalize his place in this family too, I'd be open to that conversation. Chen Mei Lin was quiet for so long that Jack began to worry he'd overstepped. Finally, she spoke in a voice thick with emotion. When I knocked on your door that night, I thought I was just looking for help with a medical emergency. I never imagined I was looking for a home. Neither did I, Jack admitted. But that's what we found, isn't it? As if summoned by their conversation, Ming Shan's voice drifted through the baby monitor on the porch table. Not crying, but the soft babbling he'd begun doing when he was content and tried to fall asleep. I should go check on him, Chen Mei Lin said, rising from her chair. We should go check on him, Jack corrected gently, and felt his heart lift at her smile of agreement. Inside the house, they found Ming Shan sitting up in his crib, playing with the stuffed horse that Jack had given him for Christmas. The baby looked up at their approach with bright eyes and reached out his arms, not caring which of them picked him up first. As Jack lifted Ming Shan and felt the solid weight of the child against his chest, he thought about the grandfather clock in the hallway, still marking time, still counting the moments of his life. But now those moments were filled with purpose and connection with the daily miracles of watching children grow and discover the world around them. The storm that had brought this family to his door had long since passed, but its aftermath continued to ripple through their lives in ways none of them could have predicted. Li Wei was right about kindness creating endless circles. Every act of care generated more care. Every moment of connection opened possibilities for deeper connection. Every risk taken in the name of love made greater love possible. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the prairie grass as it had for centuries, carrying the scents of sage and wildflowers across the vast landscape. Inside the ranch house, 3 generations of an unlikely family prepared for sleep, secure in the knowledge that they had found their way home to each other. The lamps that Jack had lit on that first desperate night had never been extinguished. They continued to burn bright, casting warmth and welcome into a world that sometimes seemed too dark and cold for human flourishing. But in this house, on this ranch, under the endless Montana sky, a family had been born from courage and sustained by love. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.